Tucked below the limestone bluffs midway between Cincinnati and Louisville, you'll find one of the largest national historic landmark districts in America. Madison, Indiana was established in 1809 along the superhighway of the time, the mighty Ohio River. As the United States expanded to the west, commerce from flatboats and paddle wheelers grew Madison into a major transportation hub. Its wealth created investment in many finely built homes and businesses that have survived the several booms and busts of a river town economy.
Madison is one of the most important historic towns in the United States, on par with Savannah and Charleston, Nantucket, places like that. And you can walk around and just kind of immerse yourself in American history. It's all around. You can reach out and touch it in any of our historic buildings.
Founded in 1809, it has buildings as early as 1817, and quite a few of them from the 1820s to 1840s. Our Main Street has a beautiful collection of 19th and early 20th century commercial buildings. A lot of communities have lost historic buildings in their Main Street, and you get gaps, sort of like gap teeth. Not here.
200 years after its founding, and despite protections provided by historic landmark status, the future of Madison was threatened. The bridge connecting the community to Milton, Kentucky, its more rural neighbor across the Ohio River, was deteriorating rapidly and in desperate need of replacement. Prior to its construction in the late 1920s, ferry boats were the only way to cross the Ohio between Milton and Madison. The bridge opened to traffic with much fanfare on a cold December day in 1929. 100-year-old Riva Webster was there.
There's the one. There's the one that we're on.
Riva represented Milton in the Queen of the Bridge pageant and parade.
Let's see, I was 16. I was in school. I was in high school. We were called the princesses. They let us call ourselves that. We hung on for dear life, I tell you. It was snowing, and it's been snowing and sleeting. I can't even see how attractive I am because all I can see is just a little round face that was looking like this. But anyway, we had a good time, and it was wonderful. But we were miserable.
Throughout the following decades, the bridge created new opportunities for residents of both states. Madison enjoyed new customers for its retailers, restaurants, and theaters. And Kentuckians from Milton now had easier access to the jobs, goods, and services a larger neighboring town could provide.
Well, I grew up in Milton, Kentucky. I grew up on a farm, so I'm a Milton guy. Milton's a small town. Trimble County is a very rural, a lot of tobacco grown there, a lot of farming. It's a great place to live and raise a family, but the two communities are very, very closely tied together for commerce, jobs, and for everything you can think of.
That's why this bridge is so important to Madison. I mean, if you can't get across here, you've got to go about 25 miles east to Markland Dam, or you got to go about 35 or 40 miles west down the river to Louisville. So this bridge was very important to us.
By the 1990s, transportation needs had changed. Vehicles were wider, heavier, and moved faster and more frequently across the Ohio. The bridge that helped commerce flourish between the two states now began to hinder it.
The condition of the bridge was deteriorating. Its functionality had been a problem for a long time. It was built for horse and buggies and Model A's. And with the new cars and trucks especially, two semis could hardly pass without hitting mirrors. And it was becoming a big problem for industry, taking their goods and services north or south.
The communities understood they were losing money economically. It was unsafe. It was a structurally deficient bridge.
For 2 decades, community leaders advocated for a replacement bridge at a time when money was becoming more scarce for state transportation projects.
In the beginning, more than not, I was told, Jack, it's too expensive a project. It's a huge project for a small community to be successful with. And my answer to them was, it is, but we're going to work toward this.
Nobody likes to pay taxes. But most citizens understand that these are critical needs that our communities have. Everybody wants to travel on a good and safe road, but people want you to invest their money wisely, and I think that's incumbent on people like me, politicians who make these decisions, to say, you know, let's go where the need is greatest, or where the opportunities are greatest for future growth, and let's make our investments there. And if we continue to do that, I think people will be more than willing to make those investments with their dollars.
It was apparent that something had to be done, and so for us, investing in that element of our infrastructure became critical. US 421 is a crucial link between our states in that particular area. It's the only bridge for several miles up and down river in either direction, so you know it just has to be done.
Funding is always an issue. You will never have enough funding for all the needs that we have, so there has to be priorities made. But eventually you have to address the issues that are the most impactful to the areas, and obviously this bridge was a huge impact to that area. So it became a high priority of both governors, and we all went to work to make it happen.
Back in about June of 2008, Michael Baker got involved early on. We were the consultant on the bridge type selection and environmental study. That was the part of the project where you look at all the different alternatives up and down the river, try to figure out what makes sense, and there was a lot of community involvement at that point in time to figure out what the community's needs were.
In addition to transportation officials at the table and groups like Historic Madison locally, there was the National Trust for Historic Preservation, there was the National Park Service, and then there were local people who own historic homes and have businesses and investments in the historic district that also had the opportunity to participate.
We did not want to lose that designation. That was a key thought. We're very proud that we are one of the largest in the country, you know, and we didn't want that to be damaged.
We would alternate those public meetings, one on the Kentucky side, one on the Indiana side. So everybody felt like they had ownership and they had something to say about what we would have at the end of the day when the bridge was built.
In the midst of the design and planning of the replacement bridge project, the American economy suffered its largest financial crisis since the Great Depression. Banks and businesses failed, unemployment rates doubled. In an effort to stem the tide of further job losses, the federal government enacted the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. The economic stimulus package included over $1.5 billion called Tiger Grants for shovel-ready transportation reinvestment projects.
As we were working toward the final throes of how do we pay for the project, we decided to jointly, the two states working together, jointly submit a request for Tiger program funding, and we were successful to the tune of $20 million.
A lot of times there's a lot of federal requirements that go along with these projects, and a shovel-ready project is a project that's already met those requirements, something they're ready to start the bulldozers moving and start moving the dirt.
All those steps had already been taken. We'd already done a lot of the public hearings, environmental impact, the critical need for the structure to be replaced, so it all just lined up that we were ready to go.
The project needed to go design build in order to meet the requirements of the Tiger Grant. Essentially, it had to be substantially complete in 2012. A design build project is a little bit different than a typical bid build project in the sense that the design is not 100% complete when the contractor gets a hold of it. The theory behind design build is that the designer and the contractor come together to work out a more efficient way to do things.
Even though Kentucky was the lead state on the bridge, Indiana had a design build contracting authority, which Kentucky did not. So to help expedite the project, we were able to bid the contract and actually take ownership of that. So it was a cooperative effort between both states in that we were able to do something at that time they couldn't. So we stepped up and helped them through that process.
By 2010, enough of the design was in place to receive bids from potential contractors. The winning bid would be selected using the A+B evaluation technique. The A portion being the cost of constructing the replacement superstructure while rehabilitating the 1929 piers underneath. The B portion of the bid would include a per-day bridge closure value of $25,000, limited to 365 days of total closure.
So it was very important in this bid to get the least amount of closure because it would be the least impactful for the motoring public and the communities on both sides.
It is crucial in a historic town or a historic building that it be used and that it be active and that whatever goes on happens continuously. 18 months of closure for maybe half of the market could not get here. They might permanently lose customers. We were terrified about that possibility. We thought that was very frightening.
We had 5 bidders on the project, and of the 5 bidders, there was only one that chose to bid less than the 365 days of closure. That contractor was Walsh Construction.
It was a joint effort between Burgess and Nipel, their subcontractor Buckland and Taylor, who took care of the truss design, and Walsh Construction that made up the design build team.
An innovative plan was proposed by the Walsh team. In order to maintain a flow of traffic throughout construction, a new superstructure would be assembled on barges along the shore and then lifted onto temporary piers alongside the existing bridge. The 1929 span would remain in service while its piers were strengthened above and below the Ohio River. When the new truss and approaches were complete, traffic flow would switch to the new bridge and the old one removed to make way for widening of the original piers. Most surprisingly, the team planned to slide the nearly half-mile-long bridge more than 50 feet onto those rehabilitated piers. Engineers called for the Ohio River crossing to be closed for only 10 days during construction.
We were anticipating a year-long closure. We couldn't believe it. We were ecstatic.
I think from an economic standpoint and the local communities, it benefited them the most by doing it this way. And it got us the job, obviously.
With the winning bid in place, ground was broken in the fall of 2010. National Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood traveled from Washington to Madison to join local and state dignitaries in turning ceremonial dirt. The first construction challenge was to rehabilitate the existing 1929 piers. Although solidly constructed, there were problems below the surface.
The biggest deficiency of the piers was the fact that the part below the river, which extended about 80 feet down below the river bottom all the way down to bedrock, was unreinforced. And in today's standards, that is just unheard of. And when you actually run the numbers and for wind on the bridge or barge hitting the bridge, it just doesn't work.
Cofferdams were used to expose the 80-year-old pier caisson on the river bottom. Workers drilled holes up to 70 feet deep and inserted bundles of steel rods to reinforce and strengthen the perimeter of the pier's foundation. Additional reinforcement was also added to the pier stem, which reaches out of the water to meet the roadway.
Considering you're in the middle of the Ohio River under wet conditions, it's a challenge. We experienced 8 flood events in the first 14 months of this project. 2011 was the wettest year on record up the Ohio Valley. We really think that we lost in workable days close to 250 days the first 14 months of the project.
Simultaneous to the pier strengthening, work began to design and construct the replacement truss superstructure.
As soon as you win the job for a design build project like this, it's all about the time. So that means that right away the contractor's asking the designer, what are all our plate sizes? We haven't designed the thing yet. So a huge amount of effort went into the first couple weeks of design to pin down how long and how thick and how much steel plate you needed for this bridge.
Once the steel began arriving in summer 2011, the 2 longest segments of the bridge truss were assembled on barges linked together along the riverbank in Milton. A 600-foot-long assembly was then floated into position and lifted 90 feet above the water using a technology called strand jacking. A series of computer-synchronized hydraulic jacks pulled upon strands of steel cables attached to the 1,700-ton truss. The jack's mechanism alternates clamping and extension cycles to raise extremely heavy loads with precision control.
You just have to be really precise, and You know, the old joke in the industry, we're building a bridge, not a watch. Well, in this case, we had to build a watch to make it work.
We want to have this bridge sitting on this temporary pier, and we want to be able to slide it onto the rehabilitated pier. That was what we needed in the end, but before we got there, we had to somehow lift this whole thing and then put it down on something. But we couldn't have anything there to put it down on because we had to lift it past all of this. So the two construction methods were completely at odds with each other.
Adding to this dilemma were the time constraints of closing one of the busiest inland shipping routes in the country, the Ohio River. At 727 feet, the longest truss segment traversed the Ohio's navigable channel.
In less than 24 hours, we had to have the river back open. So we had a process by where we lifted that up, and then the crane brought in this massive sliding girder, which itself was 100 tons. And then once it was in place, and then we were able to lower the truss, let it sit on it, and then we could get the crane out of the way and go and open the river.
Construction of the remainder of the truss continued throughout 2012, all while traffic remained flowing across the original 1929 bridge. Due to the long-term nature of the project and their familiarity from work done in the development stages, engineers from Baker International were chosen to supervise construction.
Baker was hired to oversee the project on a daily basis, to do construction inspection, to make sure that the contractor was following the plans, making sure we were getting the product that we were paying for.
Baker also placed people on site to manage the project. So Larry Collins actually works for Baker, but he worked as an agent for NDOT. And when I worked with Larry on a daily basis, I saw him as NDOT.
Collins is a Trimble County native who'd recently settled with his family in Madison's historic district when the bridge project was announced.
I worked in Bedford, Kentucky, Trimble County, so I knew I'd be impacted by the bridge project. Being my lifeline to get to work, all the family lives in Trimble County, we live in Madison. I was ecstatic that I still have the bridge. I can still traverse back and forth across the river and only be, closed for the short duration. So just both things just excited me to be working on it and being in the community. It was vital to have that bridge open.
The project's next phase, removing the 1929 bridge superstructure, proved to be the most visually spectacular.
Once the concrete was completely removed, using explosive demolition cutting charges, it's a process of just moving along in a certain order to bring it down. Yeah, we were 15 feet between bridges. So for the most part, it did pretty good. We had a few little nicks here and there, no structural damage whatsoever.
Along with guarding the new bridge from damage, the project team partnered with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife biologists to protect a family of rare peregrine falcons who had chosen the bridge as a nesting site.
The female at that point in time, I think she was on young chicks. She definitely noticed. She kind of got up and looked around, and I think she may have thought a thunderstorm was coming because she just hunkered back down on the chicks, and everything was okay.
With just 13 peregrine falcon pairs in Kentucky, losing the Milton-Madison nesting site would be a major setback to the species' recovery efforts.
I am sure at the beginning Walsh was wondering what this meant for them, but as time went on, we found that the company really fell in love with the birds, and they went from being cooperative to really going out of their way to accommodate these birds. And actually every single year that the bridge has been reconstructed, there has been successful nesting on the bridge, so it worked out great.
As falcon nesting season began again in early 2014, preparations were already underway for the final construction milestone. The 2,400-foot superstructure, which is nearly half a mile, would be slid laterally more than 50 feet onto the newly widened caps of the rehabilitated piers. Engineers plan to utilize the same hydraulic strand jacks as were used to lift the pre-assembled trusses onto the temporary piers. This time mounted horizontally, the computer-synchronized jacks would pull a harness strapped to the truss bearings.
These bearings basically allow the bridge to move as it expands and contracts with temperature variations.
The bearings would slide on a lubricated Teflon pad across a polished steel surface, carrying with it the 30 million pound bridge. During installation of the harness and just days from commencing the slide, the crews encountered a setback.
The base plate, the lower pad, slipped out during that process, allowing the bridge at that corner to drop 10 inches. Well, obviously at that point we had to close the bridge down, something we didn't want to have to do by any means.
For the first time, area motorists faced an extended bridge closure and an hour-long detour to reach the opposite side of the river. Had the bridge been replaced by traditional construction methods, the communities would have had to endure such a detour for a year or longer.
I would like to say, oh, we'd have made it through that, and we would have, but it would have been terrible. We would have had a lot of our downtown businesses closing. It would have been pretty devastating to our community.
So, working together with our designers and working around the clock, we were able to reestablish that piece back in 12 days. And then to ensure that we had no more problems with the harness system, we took a few extra days, with the bridge still being closed, we knew it was an inconvenience, to make sure that we would not have any issues during the slide itself.
With the bridge still closed to traffic, a 100-foot approach section of finished roadway was slid into its final position on the Milton shoreline. But this was just a precursor for the historic slide, the placement of the nearly half-mile-long superstructure.
Sliding a bridge is typical in this industry, but not to this scale. And sliding a truss this big seemed difficult to everybody but VSL Corporation, the people that specialize in lifting and sliding. And they always looked at it as just another day at the office. Everything worked so well that the anticipated coefficient of friction between 8 and 15% ended up about 3% during the slide.
With lower than expected friction on the sliding girder and with tailwind gusts of up to 30 miles per hour, sliding operations were halted after moving almost 1/3 of the distance to the refurbished piers.
The bridge started wanting to move on its own. And when I say it started moving on its own, we were talking, quarters of an inch. But when you have a company out there that has promised to keep it in a line to within 3 millimeters over 2,400 feet, a quarter inch gets to be worrisome. And people say, oh, come on, the wind can't blow that thing sideways. Sure it can. If you think about the square footage of exposed surface of the truss out there, it's a big sail.
By the next morning, the bridge was on the move again, with a system in place to control any unwanted push from the Ohio Valley winds.
For those of us who got to actually be on the bridge during the slide, unless you had a visual reference, you could not tell you were moving.
The nesting peregrine falcons could attest to the smooth journey.
They were sitting on eggs while the bridge was moving. They were actually riding the bridge and nesting at the same time and didn't even break an egg.
And so, on April 10th, 2014, the nearly half-mile-long, 30 million pound bridge connecting Kentucky and Indiana finished its journey, completing the longest bridge slide ever attempted in North America and perhaps the world. 1 week later, the Milton-Madison Bridge was reopened to traffic, perhaps without the same fanfare as the parade in 1929, but definitely with the spirit of welcoming back an old friend.
It's history in the making right now. This is a great day for everything we do, for our commerce, for the people who work here and the people who live here and work on the other side of the river, for people who have friends and family on both sides. This will save everybody a lot of time and a lot of money.
The new bridge fits in. If you had never seen the old bridge, you might not know that it's actually a new bridge.
Well, and that's kind of our guideline as preservationists. We like to see things in the historic context to be compatible in materials and, in this case, form.
It's very open, and you have the sidewalk that we didn't have before. If you tried to walk across that bridge before, you wouldn't have made it.
It's really important, I think, for citizens to see that not only can we work across state lines, we can work across political lines to get these important infrastructure projects built.
In the fall of 2014, the governors of both states gathered with those who worked diligently to see this project through. They celebrated what many said couldn't be done because it was either too costly or politically difficult.
And I want to thank Governor Pence, who's here today, Governor Daniels, who couldn't be with us, for joining hands with me and making this happen.
We have demonstrated across the mighty Ohio that in Indiana and Kentucky, a brighter future is possible when we work together.
The citizens came together as well. And when those voting members of communities make their needs heard, then those that are in office listen.
So I think when you look at innovation, I think anything's on the table, and I think you owe it to taxpayers to be able to say we did the best with your project that we could and to deliver it on time and on budget.
I think the public needs to see projects like this and have a little more faith, a little more trust that there are very capable engineers and the engineering community out there who are willing to transform our aging system into something, again, that America can be proud of.
That bridge is the highlight of my career that I'm most proud of. And it's not proud because I done it, but I'm proud because we had partners. All came together, and when you do that, great things can happen.